course, the other thing that you want to do is move around on these planetary objects, and so we've been involved in a number of different programs. I think it says here 20 plus Moon and Mars rover related programs. Not all of them have ever gone to space. A lot of them have been design work and so on, but you can sort of see some of it. If you came up to Brampton, you'll see we have a kind of a mock-up of Martian surface in our labs, and we've got different rovers that move around and try to figure out how you can move around without falling over and so on. And you can see there's some other spin-offs of helicopter testing and some other things that we do, and you can just see some of the examples that you'd see if you came to the lab. The ExoMars mission is probably the biggest anticipated mission. It looks like it's the one that's going to hold the funding together, and this one we've been involved in for quite a long time and have delivered some of the key technologies in terms of the structure and so on. The other thing, of course, you have to move around, you want to explore, and you want to land. And with some of the work that we did with LiDARs and some of the other ways that we can do visualization and so on, we've been able to apply those technologies, working with the NASA, ESA, and our space agency in terms of vision systems and LiDARs and so on to enable you to do soft landings. We're always looking for new opportunities. So we had you can see the heritage that we have in space. The question to us was, where else could you go and use these technologies? I remember this probably 10 years ago, we had spent a great deal of time thinking about where else could you apply the technologies. There was a whole long list. And the two that I'm going to talk about very quickly, one is medical and the other was mining. Why medicine? If you actually think about medicine, and especially you've heard some of the discussion this morning about using fairly complex radiography and so on. It's a fairly hostile environment in an operating theater now. There's a lot going on in there, and so it would be sometimes nice if the surgeon was somewhere else and could do the surgery there and so on. So we looked at that and said it's a hostile environment, but you need to want to have sort of human-like capabilities. The other thing that our robotics had to do in space, and I use the term do no harm. If you are working with spacecraft or with astronauts or both, one of the things you have to be absolutely sure of is that your robot doesn't do any harm to either one of those. And that's not a simple, trivial problem because you don't always have control of the robot. The robot sometimes has to do its own thing. It's quite possible, for example, if you're controlling from the ground, that you'll lose contact. And what you don't want your robot to do is when you're not giving it commands to do something wrong. So it has to know, oh, I've lost command. Therefore, I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to go into a sort of a safe mode while I figure out what to do next. And so we spend an awful lot of time. And so a lot of people that work in robotics have never had to think that problem through carefully. And so we did, and we have, and we've been working on it. And so if you think about it in the medical environment, I mean, one of the fundamentals of medicine is do no harm. So we sort of look at this and say that's probably something we've thought enough about. So we've been involved for the last 10 or so years. This one, as a matter of fact, it is rocket science. It's a bit of a joke here. If you're in the space business, you're not allowed to use the same saying, this isn't rocket science, because most of what we do kind of is. So we used to say, this is not brain surgery. And so we got involved in a program with the University of Calgary and the Foothills Hospital in Calgary to build a device that did brain surgery. So then we lost the ability to say this isn't brain surgery either, and so I don't know what we do to say it's not that difficult. And you can see the description of it, and it was actually developed and is doing brain surgery. And here's one of the ladies who's actually had her brain surgery done with our robotic device. Now this is still experimental. We're building the follow-on prototypes and expect to start going into FDA approval in the next year or two to go through this process. But you can see this lady here, and she's showing you where in her head where the opening was done and the surgery is done. Another project that we worked on, we started this one with the Toronto Sick Kids Hospital, and this was looking at pediatrics. And one of the challenges with pediatric surgery is that everything is very, very small, and you have to rejoin things, and it's a very challenging thing for a surgeon, taking a lot of time. And so the surgeon who was there at the time said, would it be very nice if robotics could help me by doing some of the suturing for me rather than me having to do with my own hands. So we started the process there and developed a prototype, which has actually been delivered, and they're starting to use. I'll talk about this more in a minute. This is sort of the showpiece for us, and this is the breast detection and treatment project that we're doing here for CSII. The idea behind this is that tumors in the breast are sometimes difficult to detect, and so if you use MRI, and you need very accurate positioning to go in and do a biopsy. So we've been developing a device that's very, very accurate robotically to do the biopsy, and may in fact be able to be expanded to do treatments as well. And I think that's available for demo downstairs if anybody wants to see the prototype of it. We've finished sort of a fair bit of the design work, implementing the tools now, and then we expect to build 3 prototypes to go to clinical trials in the next year. The follow-on to the work on the suturing, the surgeon left the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto and moved to the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, and so the project kind of went with him. And so we've been working further to develop the ability to do broad anastomosis, which includes, suturing, clipping, stapling, and so on, in this pediatric arena, but likely to be extrapolated into other forms of surgery for adults. And you can see what it involves: an interface, a controller, obviously the vision system, the precision positioning device, and then the actual tool that does the anastomosis. The other area that we got involved in, and I'll just touch on this very briefly, one of the other areas where you have a very hostile environment and you still want to do human-like things is in the nuclear field, and in particular in site management and site remediation, where you want to do human things but you don't want the people there. And I'll just show you one example of it where we were actually involved in building, very large robotic systems, very complex, that had to be able to go in and actually get involved in the nuclear reactor. And so there's been a real big challenge. The nuclear environment for robotics is even more challenging to work in than, say, an MRI bore. We're big on university collaboration, so I really only put this slide up here to show you, the broad range of universities that we collaborate. We love collaborating with universities. We get a lot of value out of it, and I think the universities feel the same way in a number of different areas that our company's involved in. So just switching gears for the last 10 minutes or so that I have, wanted to talk a little bit about innovation, and this is all based on a book that I just finished reading called The Lean Startup, and I don't know if any of you have read it, by Eric Rice. But to me, innovation is not much good if we can't get it into use. So that's my side of it, is trying to find a way to get it to the point where people are using it. And for me, that's commercialization. So when you talk about startup sounds like you start from nothing, but companies like MDA also have to be able to innovate and have to commercialize. And so how do we do a startup inside of a big corporation? Our company has process books, especially on the space side, that are 10 feet high. And so how do you innovate in an environment that's sort of almost built not to let that happen? So this book really fascinated me when I went through it. What he says here is, what's the problem? You've got great product, you've got a brilliant team, you've got amazing technology, and you've got the right idea, and you still don't have success. Or saying another way, why doesn't a good plan plus a solid strategy plus thorough market research equal success? And I think that's a really interesting question, and it's bothered me a lot. Why is it? So we've had, on the medical side, we've been paid quite a bit of money to develop prototypes and so on, and I'll be honest and say there are times when we think we've done a great job building a prototype, and we get in contact with the people, the users, the surgeons or other practitioners, and they kind of look at it and go, yeah, well, I'm not so sure about that. I don't really quite do what I thought it was going to do, and so on. And that's, why is it that we seem to have this kind of problem? And so this book addresses it. Now, I'll say this book is actually written by a guy that was an internet applications developer and had spent time and money doing it wrong a number of times, and then said, I figured it out and then wrote the book around it. And what I'm challenged with now is figuring out how to apply it to the business that we're in. But here's one of the answers he gives to the fact of why don't those things work out to success, and it's basically that startups operate with too much uncertainty about the product or the customer. And certainly on the medical side, I can say that both of those, both the product and the customer. It's very difficult if you ask who is the customer, for example, on a medical device. You're asking yourself, is it the user, is the person that the device is operating on? Is it the surgeon? Is it the person who's paying for the treatment? You know, who is it that you're dealing with?